Okay, let's continue the topic of the oscillators tuning. And the next thing I'm gonna show you is the following. We may use Subharmonicon not only with its sequencer, but just as a regular synth that is controlled via MIDI with MIDI keyboard or controller. So as you see, I have MIDI in connected to my Ableton, to my MIDI keyboard, and I can play just the regular notes with the external MIDI controller. And let's see how we may use this functionality as synth, MIDI keyboard and tuning oscillators. Let's create a classical Moogish bass or lead using this plenty of oscillators. So I have my VCO1 tuned to note C, and pay your attention, my quantize mode is set to off. But if I tweak VCO frequency, it's still quantized to some notes. It's not like just fine-tuning that is expected when quantize is off. So let's hear. So this knob still acts like a transposition in semitones. If I add the second oscillator, they both use the same frequency, the same waveform, and you hear this little detuning or beating effect because the oscillators are not perfect in terms of tuning. This is fine for analog synths, we love this effect actually, and even in digital synth we try to emulate this behavior. But what if we want to detune these two oscillators even more? At the moment the beating and the detuning is quite subtle, but I want the detuning to be greater. As we have just seen, we can't use these knobs to fine-tune in sense, not in semitones, but in sense detuning effect. And I will show you now how to achieve this behavior, this transposition in sense, detuning, fine-tuning, whatever, using the patch bay and the oscillators. For this, let's connect sequencer to output to VCO to input. Now this row of the knobs controls the frequency of the oscillator 2. We're not going to use the whole sequence, we're going to use just the first knob to control the fine-tuning of the VCO2 frequency. Now let's try it. And you see and you hear that the tuning now is changed not in semitones, but in sense. And you can set the sensitivity of this knob with the octave selector. So if it is ±1, this knob behaves in a very detailed way. If the octave selector is set to ±5, the range of this knob is getting more wider, and it's hard to fine-tune in sense this position. So for our purposes, I'll select ±1. And now you can decide how much you want to detune the second oscillator from the first one. Another way we can use this sequencer's knob to control something on Subharmonicon is pulse width modulation. As you know, if we select pulse, we can modulate it with this pulse modulation input. But there's no dedicated knob where we can control it manually. We can either control it with the sub-oscillator or from some external input. But if we connect, for example, sequencer 1 output to pulse width modulation of the oscillator 1, we can now manually change pulse width with this first knob. Let's try it. I'll select pulse. I'll turn off VCO2 level for some time to hear it without any other sounds. So you have just heard that the pulse width is being changed. But the range ±1 is not enough to get all the ranges of the width of the pulse. I can't make it quite narrow. So to increase this range, we should select ±5 or ±2. Now we can combine oscillator 1 with some custom pulse width and oscillator 2 with some detuning. What we're hearing now, after I selected ±5 octave selector, my detuning effect became quite dramatic. We should set it one more time to get a cleaner sound. For the purposes of detuning the oscillator, we liked the ±1 position because it gives us more detailed settings. But for pulse modulation, we liked ±5 because it gives much more dramatic effect. So we can choose ±2, somewhere in between. We still have quite wide range for pulse width modulation and a quite narrow range for detuning. And now let's combine the two oscillators. We are using now only two oscillators without any subs. We can use this result for making classical Moog leads, basses, if we set filter and envelopes in a different way. I'll add some effects. At the moment, both oscillators use the same frequency, so we just have this beating detuning effect. But it's not a secret, we have 4 other oscillators, 2 sub-oscillators here and here. And we can mix them to the main oscillators to get a fatter or lower sound. So all of you know that famous mini Moog sound when 3 oscillators are set in 3 different octaves, and this gives a fat, massive sound. With Moog Subharmonicon, we can go even further because we have 6 oscillators and we can set them in 6 different octaves. And the result is gonna be huge. I'm gonna leave main oscillators frequencies where they are at the moment. I'm not gonna shift them in semitones or octaves. I'm gonna play with the octaves using the sub-oscillators. Let's start with the first one, and I'm gonna select sawtooth waves for both oscillators, and let's add the notes. This is 1 octave lower from this one. This is 2 octaves lower from this frequency. Now let's add these subs. This one is 3 octaves lower from this. And this one is 4 octaves lower than this frequency. So in sum, we have 5 octaves of oscillators. Original frequency -1, -2, -3, -4. We can also raise all the knobs up to overdrive the filter. Let's add some attack and some effects. So you hear the result is very massive, and you can get that classical moogish sound using your Subharmonicon. I'll put an arpeggiator on my MIDI channel. Let's make some simple sequence.